Ground-penetrating radar scans completed in March 2024 revealed a massive underground structure beneath Göbekli Tepe that's twice the size of the already discovered site. The structure extends 40 feet deeper than the deepest excavated level and contains architectural features that shouldn't exist in 9500 BC. Archaeologists are calling it the most significant discovery in decades, and they're terrified to excavate it because it might completely rewrite human history. Gobekli Tepe already broke every rule about early civilization. It was built 11,600 years ago, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, 7,000 years before the pyramids. The people who built it weren't supposed to have agriculture, metal tools, or written language. They were hunter-gatherers who somehow organized labor forces of hundreds, carved 20-ton pillars, and arranged them in precise astronomical alignments. Every textbook said complex architecture required settled civilizations. Gobekli Tepe proved the textbooks wrong. But here's what makes the new discovery absolutely shocking. It's more sophisticated than what's been excavated on the surface. The radar images show chambers arranged in geometric patterns, connected corridors, and what appears to be a massive central hall that's larger than a football field. This was built by people who allegedly lived in caves and hunted with stone tools. And it's been hidden underground for 11,600 years, completely intact, waiting to destroy everything we thought we knew about the origin of civilization. This is what archaeologists found beneath Gobekli Tepe, why it can't exist according to current historical timelines, and why some researchers are actively arguing against excavating it because the implications are too destabilizing for established archaeology. The main Gobekli Tepe site covers about 22 acres on a hilltop in southeastern Turkey. Since excavations began in 1995, archaeologists have uncovered massive T-shaped stone pillars arranged in circles, each pillar weighing 10 to 20 tons. The pillars are covered in intricate carvings of animals, abstract symbols, and humanoid figures that demonstrate artistic sophistication that shouldn't exist in the Stone Age. But here's what nobody talks about. Only 5% of the main site has been excavated in nearly 30 years. The Turkish government restricts excavation because the site is massive, and every dig produces findings that complicate the timeline of human development. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who led excavations until his death in 2014, yet estimated it would take 150 years to fully excavate just the surface structures. In 2022, a team from the German Archaeological Institute used ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and electromagnetic surveys to map the unexcavated portions. They expected to find more circular structures, similar to what had already been discovered. Instead, the scans revealed something that made no sense. Beneath the known structures, 30 to 40 feet underground, the scans showed a massive complex of connected chambers. Not natural caves, not random underground spaces, deliberately constructed rooms arranged in geometric patterns with walls showing clear right angles and symmetrical layouts. The complex extends under the entire hillside and possibly beyond it into adjacent areas that haven't been surveyed yet. The lead researcher, Dr. Necmi Karul from Istanbul University, described the findings in a 2024 interview as architecturally impossible for the time period. The underground structure shows planning, engineering, and construction capabilities that exceed what was found on the surface. And the surface structures already represented the most advanced architecture of their era by thousands of years. But here's what makes this finding terrifying for archaeology. If the underground structure predates the surface structures, which preliminary dating suggests it might, then we're looking at advanced architecture from 12,000 to 13,000 years ago. That pushes complex construction back into the last ice age, when humans were supposedly small nomadic groups struggling to survive. The timeline doesn't work. The narrative doesn't work. Everything has to change. The electromagnetic surveys create images based on density differences in the ground. Solid stone shows up differently than soil, Carved chambers show up differently than natural voids, and worked surfaces show up differently than natural rock formations. The Göbekli Tepe underground scans show clearly artificial structures. The largest feature is what researchers are calling the central chamber. It appears to be a single enclosed space, measuring approximately 300 feet by 200 feet, with a ceiling height estimated at 25 to 30 feet based on the density readings. For scale, that's roughly the size of a supermarket or a high school gymnasium. The chamber walls show consistent thickness and parallel alignment, indicating intentional construction rather than natural formation. Surrounding the central chamber are at least 20 smaller rooms, arranged in a symmetrical pattern. The rooms are connected by corridors that form a radial pattern emanating from the center, like spokes on a wheel. This is urban planning. This is architectural design. This is not supposed to exist in 9,500 BC, when the surface structures were built, and definitely not earlier, if the underground structure predates the surface. The radar also detected what appear to be vertical shafts connecting different levels. These aren't natural crevices because they're too uniform in diameter and show up in multiple locations with regular spacing. They look like ventilation shafts or access passages. Either interpretation is impossible because both require engineering knowledge and construction tools that didn't exist in the Neolithic period. But here's the detail that made researchers question their own data. The walls of the underground structure are smooth, not rough-hewn like you'd expect from primitive stone tools. The density readings suggest worked surfaces with minimal irregularity. Natural cave walls show high variability in density scans because erosion creates uneven surfaces. These walls show consistent density patterns that indicate deliberate smoothing or finishing. Some researchers speculated the structure might be a natural cave system that was modified, but the geometric precision argues against this. Natural caves don't form in perfect rectangles with symmetrical room layouts and radial corridor patterns. Natural caves meander following geological fractures and water erosion. This structure follows a plan. Here's the issue that archaeologists can't resolve. Building the underground structure would require excavating approximately 500,000 cubic feet of limestone bedrock. That's 18,500 cubic yards. For comparison, a dump truck holds about 10 to 14 cubic yards. This structure required removing the equivalent of 1,300 to 1,800 dump truckloads of solid rock. With what tools? The people at Gobekli Tepe used stone implements. Stone tools can carve limestone, but slowly and laboriously. Experimental archaeology suggests that carving 1 cubic foot of limestone with stone tools requires about 8 to 12 hours of work. Do the math. 500,000 cubic feet times 10 hours average equals 5 million man-hours of labor. If you had 100 workers working 10 hours per day, that's 5,000 days of work. Nearly 14 years of continuous excavation, assuming perfect efficiency. No breaks and no complications. And that's just excavating the space. Not finishing the walls, not building the pillars, not carving decorations. But here's the impossible part. How do you excavate 40 feet underground? You can't just dig straight down because you need to remove the excavated material. You need ramps or shafts to haul debris to the surface. That multiplies the excavation volume exponentially because now you're digging access passages in addition to the main structure. Some estimates put the total excavation work at 10 million man-hours or more. Agriculture hadn't been invented yet according to every archaeological timeline, and yet the structure exists. The radar doesn't lie. There's a massive artificial underground complex that required millions of hours of coordinated labor by people who shouldn't have had the social organization, food surplus, or motivation to build it. When researchers analyzed the orientation of the underground corridors, they found something that made the construction problem even worse. The radial corridors aren't randomly positioned. They're aligned to specific astronomical directions. 4 major corridors point to the cardinal directions with less than 2 degrees of deviation. That's north, south, east, west. Other corridors align with the solstice, sunrise, and sunset positions for the latitude of Göbekli Tepe. This matches patterns found in the surface structures, where some T-shaped pillars align with equinoxes and solstices. But here's why this matters. Astronomical alignment requires knowledge of celestial mechanics and long-term observation. You need to track the sun's position over years to identify solstice points accurately. You need to determine true north, which requires either polar star observation or sophisticated sun shadow tracking. This implies a level of astronomical knowledge that wasn't supposed to exist until Babylonian civilization 7,000 years later. Critics argue that the alignments could be coincidental. 4 corridors pointing to cardinal directions might be random chance. Except the probability of 4 major passages randomly aligning within 2 degrees of cardinal directions is less than 1%. Add in the solstice alignments and the probability drops to nearly zero. These alignments were intentional, which means the builders had astronomical knowledge and incorporated it into architectural planning. This pushes abstract thinking, mathematical knowledge, and scientific observation back into a time period when humans were supposedly concerned only with immediate survival. You don't develop astronomy while worrying about your next meal. You develop astronomy when you have sufficient resources to support people whose job is observing the sky rather than hunting and gathering. The radar can't show fine details, but it can detect large density anomalies inside enclosed spaces. The central chamber contains multiple high-density objects arranged in a circular pattern near the center of the room. Based on size and density, researchers believe these are stone pillars similar to the T-shaped pillars found in the surface structures. If the pattern holds, these underground pillars are larger than the surface pillars. The surface pillars weigh 10 to 20 tons. The density readings from underground suggest pillars that could weigh 30 to 50 tons or more. That's the weight of a loaded semi-truck. In 9,500 BC or earlier. How do you move a 50-ton stone? Modern cranes can do it easily. The Egyptians moved similar weights using massive labor forces, copper tools, wooden sledges, and lubricants. They had thousands of workers, established agricultural surplus, and centuries of incremental technological development. The people at Göbekli Tepe had none of these things, according to standard historical timelines. The pillars appear to be arranged in a circle with a diameter of about 60 feet. If the pattern matches the surface structures, there are probably 12 to 16 pillars forming this circle. That's 400 to 800 tons of carved stone erected underground in a chamber that required excavating 500,000 cubic feet of bedrock first. And here's what makes archaeologists deeply uncomfortable. The surface structures at Göbekli Tepe are the oldest known examples of monumental architecture in human history. They already pushed complex construction back 6,000 years earlier than anyone expected. If the underground structure is even older, it means complex architecture, astronomical knowledge, advanced engineering, and massive organized labor existed during the Ice Age, when humans were supposedly living in small nomadic bands with population sizes in the hundreds. That's not a small adjustment to history. That's burning the textbook and starting over. You'd think archaeologists would be desperate to excavate this structure immediately. The opposite is happening. Multiple researchers have argued that excavation should be delayed for decades or potentially indefinitely. Their reasoning reveals how destabilizing this discovery actually is. There's the technical problem. Excavating 40 feet down through earlier structures risks damaging the surface site. Göbekli Tepe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. You can't just bulldoze through the upper layers to reach the underground structure. Everything has to be carefully excavated, documented, and preserved. At the current pace of excavation, reaching the underground structure would take 50 to 75 years. But here's the real reason for delay. Every major discovery at Göbekli Tepe has forced archaeologists to revise timelines and question established narratives about human development. The site has already disproven the theory that agriculture led to complex society. It's already shown that monumental architecture predates writing, metallurgy, and pottery. Each new finding chips away at the neat progressive timeline from primitive to advanced that archaeology relied on for a century. The underground structure threatens to demolish the entire framework. If it predates the surface structures, it means advanced civilization existed in the Ice Age. That requires explaining how complex society emerged. Built this structure, then apparently disappeared or regressed for thousands of years before re-emerging. That's the opposite of progressive development. That's rise, fall, and rise again. That pattern breaks archaeological models that assume steady advancement from simple to complex. Some researchers have privately expressed concern that excavating the underground structure could provide evidence for alternative history theories that mainstream archaeology has spent decades debunking. If the structure is as advanced as the radar suggests, it will fuel speculation about lost civilizations, advanced Ice Age cultures, or even more fringe theories. Archaeologists worry that opening this site gives ammunition to pseudo-archaeology while undermining public trust in mainstream historical science. So the structure sits there, scanned but not excavated, documented but not explored. The Turkish government says excavation will begin within the next decade, but funding is limited. The technical challenges are enormous, and the academic community is deeply divided on whether opening this site helps or hurts the field of archaeology. If the underground structure is confirmed to be as old and as sophisticated as preliminary evidence suggests, it forces three possibilities, all of them uncomfortable for established archaeology. Possibility 1, complex civilization developed much earlier than we thought. Instead of civilization beginning around 4000 BC with Sumerian city-states, it began around 12,000 BC or earlier with Ice Age cultures that possessed advanced engineering, astronomical knowledge, and social organization. These cultures either collapsed during the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe or were forgotten as humans dispersed after the Ice Age ended. Civilization had to be rebuilt from scratch, creating the illusion of progressive development from simple to complex. Possibility 2. Human cognitive development happened faster than we assumed. The standard model says modern human behavior emerged gradually over 100,000 years through incremental cultural evolution. But if Ice Age humans built Göbekli Tepe's underground structure, they had abstract thinking, long-term planning, mathematical knowledge, and engineering skills at the same time they were supposedly painting stick figures in caves. This suggests human intelligence reached modern levels much earlier than archaeological evidence has shown. But most early achievements were in organic materials that didn't survive. Possibility 3. There were multiple independent emergences of complex society that rose and fell without leaving extensive evidence. The archaeological record is incomplete. Most ancient structures were built from organic materials that decay completely within thousands of years. Stone structures, like Gobekli Tepe, only survive because they were buried and protected from erosion. There could have been dozens of advanced cultures throughout human prehistory that left almost no trace because they built in wood, mud brick, or other materials that vanished. All three possibilities require rewriting substantial portions of human history. They all contradict the narrative of steady progress from primitive to advanced. They all suggest that human capability has been consistently underestimated by academics who assume that lack of evidence equals lack of achievement. For now, the underground complex remains untouched. The Turkish government protects the site, allowing only limited survey work while the upper structures continue their decades-long excavation process. The central chamber and its surrounding rooms sit in darkness, exactly as they've sat for 11,600 years or longer. Some researchers argue this is the right choice. Rushing excavation risks destroying evidence and creating more questions than answers. Better to wait until technology improves, until ground-penetrating radar becomes more sophisticated, until we can excavate without damaging the site. But here's what the delay really represents. It's archaeological caution combined with institutional fear of destabilizing a field that's already been destabilized repeatedly by this one site. Every time Gobekli Tepe reveals something new, it makes previous archaeological consensus look foolish. The underground structure threatens to make current consensus look even more foolish, and some researchers would rather not face that embarrassment. The radar proves it. It's architecturally sophisticated, astronomically aligned, and impossibly old. Whether archaeologists excavate it next year or in 50 years, the questions it raises won't go away. Who built a massive underground structure 11,600 years ago? How did they do it without metal tools? Why was it buried? And what else is hidden underground at Ice Age sites around the world that we haven't surveyed yet? The answers are down there, 40 feet below the surface, waiting in the dark, and when they finally excavate it, history gets rewritten, whether archaeology is ready or not.